I think another reason why academia is a place that's ripe for so many of these people who are pretending to be people of color is that academia is a place in which a lot of people move all over the country for a job, even internationally, just for a job in academia. So what happens when that happens?
I'm sorry that I've been MIA for the last couple of weeks. I've been having some health issues in which I've just been really tired a lot, and I've been trying to focus on staying hydrated, eating lots of fruits and vegetables, and only somewhat succeeding. So I've been very busy over the last couple of weeks working on my book project on African nurses and the ways that they negotiate nativism and anti-Black racism in the United States. And that's kept me very busy, but also it's taken a bit of a toll on my mental health. So I've definitely been in therapy, talking to my counselor, my therapist about, staying mentally healthy despite studying really depressing topics. Thank you for your support, and I hope that you'll enjoy this episode.
Hi everybody, this is Dr. Chi with Getting Woke with Dr. Chi. I'm coming to you from Chicago, right outside of Chicago. I'm in Oak Park, Illinois these days, and I wanted to talk about the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict in which he was found not guilty. So, as many of you guys already know, I'm from Chicago, and I have a feeling that most of us Black people here in Chicago were not surprised at all by what happened in Wisconsin. It seemed as though the judge was very much going to, swing things in favor of the defendant, right? So that he would have that gun charge thrown out, which would essentially make all the other charges more or less irrelevant. And so I will admit, I didn't watch the trial because I was like, oh yeah, he's going to get off. Wisconsin? Oh yeah, he'll totally get off. And I was not surprised when I saw the verdict. And I was talking to a friend of mine. She's like, you have to be more optimistic than that. You can't just think that because it's a particular state that things are going to work a certain way. And I'm like, look, structural racism is a reality in this country, particularly in a place where we know that Black people have very poor outcomes. I know that Milwaukee is one of the cities that's the worst to live in for African Americans. And so given those statistics, and also I've got friends who are originally from Wisconsin who've talked about very difficult situations that they've been put in because of, white supremacy there. So I was not surprised at all that the judge was making light of the situation, wasn't taking it seriously, and of course, allowed Kyle Rittenhouse to get off on a technicality. In all honesty, the way that I see things, you're still a murderer. Yeah, he got off, he was acquitted, and, he won't face any jail time. At the end of the day, though, you still killed 2 people, so good luck with that, you're still a murderer. What do Jessica Krug, Andrea Smith, and Rachel Dolezal all have in common? All 3 of them are white women who pretended that they were people of color, specifically that they were women of color. Andrea Smith was outed as a Pretendian, a white woman pretending that she was an American Indian. Jessica Krug is a woman who went by the name La Bombalera, who pretended that she was Puerto Rican or Afro-Puerto Rican. And yet another woman, Rachel Dolezal, the most famous of all, I think, was a woman who told everybody that she was Black and was even president of the Spokane, Washington NAACP. All of these women were professors in academia. So this is the way I think sociologists approach understanding social life. We think about the structures around people that facilitate particular behaviors over others, or that prevent particular behaviors over others, right? So that's why this talk is going to be about understanding why it is that academia is so rife full of women who pretend to be people of color and being successful at it, right? Many of these women have prestigious positions at great institutions, have won, fellowships, or just, are seen as leaders in their communities, right? And it's not to say that these women don't have something psychological going on, because I wouldn't say that they don't. The thing is, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist. I don't know, that's not my job. As a sociologist, I'm interested in what are the structural conditions that allow for such women to be successful. And talking to some friends of mine and peers and colleagues, I think there's a number of reasons why this is happening, particularly in academia specifically. Numero uno. I think it's because academia tends to like people who can demonstrate an affiliation with white institutions. So all my life growing up, people kept telling me that I talk white. And on the one hand, I'm like, well, I lived in a predominantly white neighborhood. That's where I grew up, right? So one would, assume that you grow up around people and you'll start to talk like that. I went to a grammar school that was predominantly white, although my high school was predominantly black. Also, my parents are immigrants, and so they have a very thick Nigerian accent. I suspect that I initially sounded like them because when I talked to, little kids, like really, really little kids who are like 2-3 years old, who have parents who, are Nigerian, who have Nigerian accents, you couldn't tell that they were not in Lagos. You were like, oh, that little boy, yeah, he definitely sounds like a Niger, right? Growing up in the United States in a predominantly white neighborhood and attending a predominantly white grammar school meant that I learned to speak English in a way that was palatable to white listeners. Talking like somebody or having the cultural capital that shows an affiliation with either white communities, white institutions. For example, going to a particular boarding school and being able to name, the type of education that you had. Like maybe you didn't go to a traditional public high school. Maybe you didn't even go to a public high school in a city or a suburb. If you went to a boarding school, that's like a sign for people, right? So this affiliation with white communities and institutions can give people a check when it comes to whites. And of course, if you're a white person, you get that automatically, right? So for a lot of these people, I think what they do is they try to code switch, but really they're just speaking the way that they normally speak, and white institutions like that. So if you're curious about other videos like this, please like and subscribe. Number 2. I think another reason why academia is a place that's ripe for so many of these people who are pretending to be people of color is that academia is a place in which a lot of people move all over the country for a job, even internationally, just for a job in academia. So what happens when that happens? What had happened was the people from your neighborhood that you grew up with who went to your high school are not there to vouch for who you really are, right? If you went to high school in, let's say, the Bay Area and you get a job in, I don't know, Massachusetts, you're probably not going to find people who went to your high school who are like, oh, she's not Puerto Rican. She's a white girl. I know her. I know her family, right? Academia lends itself to people who are able to change their identities by moving because there's nobody, your family's not, you're usually like your extended family's not around you. Unless you're lucky enough to be in a situation in which you find a job close to to your community of origin, you're probably going to be in an area where very few people actually know who you were when you were, dancing ballet in 4th grade, or where they're throwing the ball at you during dodgeball practice, right? So this allows people to change their identities once they enter into graduate school, or once they go to college, or once they apply for a job in academia. Numero 3. Much like the rest of the country, academia is a pigmentocracy in which the people who academia tends to favor are the people of color who have not so much color. So I dare some of you guys to look at the top programs in your discipline and just look at the hue of the professors who are hired in those departments. Oftentimes, people of color can pass the paper bag test if they're black, or pass the manila folder test if they're not, right? So there's definitely a particular physical type, that academia prefers, especially in its women. So what this means is that women who maybe have hair that's a little curly or might have a larger nose that's wide, all this to say that if you're a white person who gets a tan, it becomes easier for you to pretend to be a person of color who academia is interested in. But why might that be the case? It's because of It's because academia claims to care a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I don't want to get into the politics of that. Yeah, that's kind of messy. And so Because of these DEI efforts, academia is really invested in hiring people who are Black, who are Latinx, who are Asian, who are particularly those who are underrepresented minorities in higher ed, right? Universities and colleges like to pride themselves on really valuing diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what happens when you're in an environment in which you really value people who come from backgrounds that are non-traditional, especially people of color? You tend to like people who can show some sort of an affiliation, showing that they've spent time in predominantly white institutions or have lived in predominantly white communities and settings and neighborhoods. You tend to like people a little bit more if they're paler versions of people of color, because we come in all different kinds of shades, right? But kind of like the palest people, right? At the same time, academia is an occupational sphere in which people tend to migrate from far from their communities of origins to these new places where they may or may not know many people who knew them when they were, a gum-chewing, 12-year-old who's getting on everybody's nerves as a preteen. So I think all these factors together have created structural conditions which allow for white women to be so successful at faking the funk. If you like this video, please like and subscribe and share it with your friends. Share it with your friends, your enemies, and your frenemies. Take care.